Father Pieper has asked me to offer a little bit of a meditation on Christ's peace and justice. I always love these topics that he gives me. This is a graduate program, and Christ's peace and justice, not a 10-minute meditation. We have think tanks in universities and governmental agencies to talk about peace and justice. But for 10 minutes or so, let's just meditate on this. I would be lying to you if I suggested that, at least as a child, the things about this season that we celebrate, Christmas, that really grabbed me most were not secular. In fact, despite all of our sometimes harping on this, the truth of the matter is, at least for me, as a child, and I must confess even now to one degree or another, it is often the secular trappings of the season that I still find attractive. I used to love, and some of you will remember this, the arrival of the Sears and Roebuck toy catalog. That was that Christmas catalog. Half of it was filled with toys. I remember as a kid paging through this thing. I used to love going on Christmas Eve down to the hardware store just a block down from where we lived, down on Cheltenham Avenue, to get the Christmas tree and tinsel for the Christmas tree because, late Christmas Eve afternoon was when those things were the cheapest. And they wanted to get rid of those things. I used to love it when a couple weeks before we'd bring the trains up, lay out newspaper, and run the trains and sandpaper any place where the tracks were rusty. It was the one time of the year that I recall that my mom ever really made cookies. She had this sort of, cookie press. She would make these cookies. Sometimes she would allow us to put sprinkles on the cookies, but not very often because the sprinkles would end up everywhere. But I think the thing, to be honest with you, that I liked the most about it were the toys. Around that same time of my life when I stopped getting toys and started getting things like underwear and flashlights and combs, that's when Christmas started to lose a little bit of its charm, But I loved the toys. Last week at the house and back at the university, a couple of us were talking. We were reminiscing about the toys that we had gotten as kids. And the different priests were talking. And I really wasn't saying a whole lot. And finally, the attention at one point or other turned towards me. And I was a little bit embarrassed because, to be honest with you, when I was thinking about the toys that we got as kids, I was really not thinking about my own. I was actually thinking about my sister's toys. I think one of them might even be sitting out there today somewhere, according to a text I got earlier. But I've wondered why I was thinking about my sister's toys rather than my own. I thought perhaps it might be because I'm just basically a covetous person, greedy. Didn't matter whether they were boys' toys, girls' toys, or our dog Fluffy's little chew toy. I wanted it all, and I wanted it in my pile, I wanted those toys for myself. I don't think it's that. I wondered, for example, if perhaps maybe I was just, as we sometimes say today, gender confused, but I don't think it was that. The more I began to think about it, the more it struck me that her toys, my two sisters' toys generally, they were what I would call non-utilitarian. All the boys' toys that I got, you always had to do something with them, Either they were like Lincoln Logs, where you had to build a log cabin, or they were like Legos, where you had to create a split-level, little home, or they were those board games where there were always winners and losers, whether it was Parcheesi or Candyland or the Game of Life, there were always winners and therefore there had to be losers. One year I remember getting an erector set, and one year I'm pretty sure I got a chemistry set, which in a passive-aggressive mood, I simply slipped back under the platform. I don't even think I opened it. I had no interest in the periodic table, nor in chemistry experiments, and certainly not in, concocting, a mild homegrown explosive. Those things weren't in my blood. My sister's toys were more interesting. Some of you who are of a certain age might remember this one. She got this toy one year, one of them, whether it was the older or the younger one. It might have been the younger, because the older one, I think, was too old for these kinds of toys. But she got this doll called Tressie, all right? This doll, when you wound its arm in one direction, its hair grew out of its head, all right? When you wound it in the other, the hair grew back, it got shorter. I remember I was a little bit scared because I was noodling with it and playing around with it, and I wound it so tight that the poor thing almost had like a crew cut. I couldn't get the hair back out again. She got this thing called an Easy Bake Oven one year. I don't remember that one. It was like this little miniature oven, and it had little miniature cake pans with cake mix, and you would mix it up and you put it in the oven. I think the heat of the lights cooked the batter. And I remember when they weren't around, playing with this thing and cooking, until I think they probably ran out of those little miniature Duncan Hines boxes that came with it. But there was one year when in my pile, there was one toy that I really liked, and it was called Creeple People. The year before, there had been this product, I think, from Mattel called Creepy Crawlers. It must have did well on the market, because the following year, they had another product called Creeple People. You poured this liquid into this thing, you heated it up, and it hardened into like a gel. And you could make these Creeple People. There was a head, weird arms, and feet. And you put them onto pencils so that the pencil had a head, funny arms, and feet. And though there were different heights, they weren't different widths. There were no Father Peeper Creeple People, they were all very thin because pencils generally are thin. I liked this a lot. I remember populating the Christmas crib with a number of these Creeple People. So you had the shepherds, the Magi, the baby Jesus, Mary, Joseph, the animals, and the Creeple People. At night, I would go to bed, and my dad would remove them. He would depopulate the creche, and Bethlehem would return to normal. Apparently, he didn't think this was a good thing to have Creeple People in the stable. But you see, to my little kid's mind, it was totally logical. Because in one sense or another, over the years of getting toys, all different sorts of wounded, fragile, weird creatures showed up at that stable. Mr. Potato Head, Gumby. I'm sure the year that my one sister got Tressie was there, and the Creeple People. Because the truth is, everyone is welcome at that stable. Everyone is welcome to that creche. I don't have any mega strategies for how one brings about peace on earth. But it does, I believe, begin with the recognition that God loves all of us, almost despite ourselves. I don't know whether it's purely coincidental or not, but it should not be lost on any of us that today is the feast of the Holy Innocents. These were the little children, the little boys 2 years and under who were massacred by Herod the Great. Some historians doubt the veracity, the historicity of this story because there is no outside source to corroborate it other than the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 2, verses 13 through 18, which we just read a few moments ago. Fair enough. But what we do know is that Herod the Great was egomaniacal, and that in the year 7 BC, he had 2 of his own sons slaughtered because he thought they might be a threat to his throne. In the year 4 BC, he had yet another son slaughtered because he thought that that son might be a threat to his throne. If he was willing to murder his own children, surely he might have been willing to murder others. And the truth is that if in Bethlehem and its vicinity at that time there lived around 1,000 people, probably in this massacre about 20 boys 2 years and under were slaughtered. To put it another way, they never saw their first, second, or third Christmas. And if history hasn't recorded it, it shouldn't surprise us, because history often doesn't record the loss and the murder of the innocent. Sometimes it's the weak and the vulnerable who aren't remembered. And so it's a very good thing as we approach New Year's Day, which is this year the 49th anniversary of the World Day of Peace, that perhaps we remember these innocents and that we remember that peace begins at the crib where everyone is welcome. You know, as we all know, a number of years ago, we had that terrible, terrible event in our own history that we sometimes now simply call 9/11. Not long after that, there was a collection of poems published. It was simply called Poems After 9/11, and there was one that was published by a person whose name is Hal Sarowitz, and it was simply called this, Cookies for Peace. And this is what he says. Father said if I gave the boy who was teasing me a bloody nose, he'd stop. Mother didn't think it was a good advice. She said I wouldn't get far in life if I tried to punch everyone who bothered me. She wanted my father to think of a better solution. He didn't have any. He said if we didn't like his advice, we should ask someone else. She said she'd continue to ask Father because there was always some hope he'd change. She knows one day the boy will change too, feel badly about teasing me, and wish he was nicer. She could speed along his transformation by giving me cookies to give to him. The next day, he teased me like he always did, but I felt I got revenge by eating his cookies. Perhaps, and perhaps not. I don't doubt for 1 minute that we are in action in a brutal and a brutalizing world. But what I do firmly believe, personally, is that peace begins at the creche. And it begins when, instead of holding grudges, we let go. When, instead of offering a bitter word, we offer a kind one. When, instead of not forgiving, we forgive. When, instead of sending away people who are different, we welcome them. When that happens, then the world will at least begin to understand what it means to bow down before the Prince of Peace. In the parish back in New York where I work, the parish is called Queen of Peace. This was a title given to our Blessed Mother by Pope Benedict XV during the First World War, in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, nations and people would begin to move towards peace and reconciliation. And so today, on the Feast of the Holy Innocents, let's ask the Mother of the Prince of Peace to intercede for us and to help our world, which is so sorely in need of the peace which that world itself cannot give.